Hello and welcome to Hindsighting, where we discuss all the movies to win the Best Picture Oscar and try to figure out if this picture truly is the best or is time rendered a different verdict. I'm Edward Clow. My guest today is a three-time bloodless screenwriter of The Inheritance, Hard Kill, The Locksmith, Soulmates, and The Au Pair Nightmare. He's also producer of several features and the podcast Postmortem with Mick Garris. He made history as my very first guest, so Joe Russo, welcome back to Hindsighting.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to be back.
So happy to have you. This episode is a part of our mini-series 1981ers, where we examine a single movie from 1981, and today we look at Raiders of the Lost Ark. Unlike the rest of the series, this was heavily Oscar-nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Cinematography, and Best Score. It won Oscars for Best Art Direction, Best Sound, Best Editing, and a special Oscar for Best Sound Effects Editing. So, Joe, why 1981? When I was a kid, my local video store, which was called Video Pursuit, which has been gone almost 30 years, that's where, I imagine like you, that's where I got my education. I would go there every weekend. My mom would take me, and I'd walk around, and I'd look at all the boxes, and I'd always flip them around, and I was always very curious what year these movies came out.
Huh.
And it always seemed like every movie came out in 1981. It seemed like every franchise had a movie that came out in 1981. As I got older and got to sort of know my directors, it seemed like every director had a movie out in 1981. There was just something about 1981 where like everybody was working. Everybody, and it's not like I think every year in the 80s is packed full of great movies, but I'll plead pure nostalgia. I just think that 1981 has, by my count, something like 19 movies that are really great, only 2 of which were given any Academy consideration. Now, Raiders of the Lost Ark, unlike the rest of the series, was heavily Oscar nominated. It won as many Oscars as Chariots of Fire, which won the Best Picture Oscar, and we talked all about that in our Chariots episode, which you can go back and listen to. So it's kind of a funny subject because it was the biggest hit of the year. It was largely critically well received, and its reputation has never faltered. It's widely considered the best Indiana Jones movie. There has never been a backlash to it, or if there was, it was like 1982 and I just missed it. So
for me, Indiana Jones has always been in my life as far as I can remember because it was so hand in hand with Star Wars.
Yeah.
And Star Wars is something that's been, in my life forever, since I can remember watching movies. And honestly, like one of the things that I think I tie Indiana Jones to as a specific memory is my parents loved Walt Disney World, and we would take trips there, pretty regularly. I would say like once every 3 years or so. And they opened this thing called MGM Studios. I think it's called the Hollywood Studios now.
Yeah.
One of the big attractions was the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular.
Yeah.
And that was really, I think, the first time where I saw, obviously, I had watched the scene with the boulder at home,
Right.
And then I got to see how that worked. And then there were there were times when we saw that attraction that my dad and I got picked to be extras in some of the stunt sequences.
Wow.
So I was on that stage. I was around the magic of this movie. And so I think it's always really had a special place in my heart, let alone the fact that it's probably one of the best movies ever made and one of my favorite movies ever. It's my second favorite movie.
And your first is what, just for the record?
Ghostbusters.
Okay.
Will always be Ghostbusters.
Yeah, let's dig into it. But first, a couple stats and trivia. So I don't know if you knew this, but maybe you did. When Brody first goes to Indy's house to discuss the mission, Indy's dressed the way he is in a robe because the script originally said that he was supposed to be with a woman. He had just had sex with a woman. And this was sort of to give him a more worldly kind of James Bond-like persona. But this was cut out because Spielberg thought that this Playboy image didn't quite fit Indy's character. And yeah, so that was really interesting. And I don't think I never knew that.
I never knew that either.
Yeah. Most of the body blow sounds were created by hitting a pile of leather jackets with a baseball bat. I've always loved the punches in this movie. It's I just love the way it sounds. The Well of Soul sequence was filmed on the same soundstage that was previously used for the Overlook Hotel in The Shining.
Ah,
Um, After its home videotape release in late 1982, this movie had the highest number of rentals per unit on the Betamax format, a record it held until Beverly Hills Cop was released for home rental in late 1985. Um, this I did not know. This blew me away. Steven Spielberg had originally offered the role of Tot. Is that the bad guy's name? The guy with the glasses who burns his hand. I think it's Tot. They never say his name.
oh, I don't know his name.
I think it's Tot.
Evil Nazi guy.
Evil Nazi guy. The guy who has the glasses and burns his hand. I think it's Tot. So I'm going to say Tot. Anyway, Spielberg originally offered the role of Tot to Roman Polanski, who himself is a Holocaust survivor. Polanski was intrigued at the opportunity to work with Spielberg, but decided he couldn't do it because he couldn't make the trip to Tunisia. So that's not something I ever knew.
Well, I'm really glad because that would have dated the movie in a really strange way.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. You know what? I like the actor who plays Todd, and yeah, Polanski in this might have actually. We might actually.
It would be a weird stain on an otherwise pretty flawless movie.
Yeah.
Uh,
This is the only Best Picture nominee this year not to be nominated for Best Screenplay, which I think is a fucking travesty. We'll get into that a little bit later. It grossed $248 million, making it the highest grosser of 1981. So let's get into it. I mean, this movie's so, like I said, this is sort of like an interesting thing for hindsighting because it was well received. It was a hit. There's been no backlash, but it's insane to talk about 1981 without talking about the biggest movie of 1981. And I think it's important to talk about this movie because even though it didn't win Best Picture, the fact that with only 5 slots that this got Best Picture, this got Best Director nominations, I think that might be the kind of thing we'd see today with 10. It might be kind of like the F1 nomination. But I like the fact that this was.
What do you mean, Ed? I liked F1.
I liked F1 too. I liked F1 too. My point.
I would put F1 in there over half the other movies that were nominated for this year. So
No, I liked F1 too. What I mean by the F1 nomination is the popcorn nomination. I think that I think there's a right or wrong, a designation now that we'll see. We'll see what next year and the years that follow. I think F1's inclusion.
Let me ask you a question. This is actually a really interesting thing. I got in a debate with a friend the day the Oscar noms came out.
Okay.
Do you think when people are nominating these movies, when they're putting down the ones they like the best, that they're really truly thinking like, man, I really need to nominate one popcorn movie? Like, do you really think they're thinking that way?
I don't know. I'd love to know what they're thinking. I'd like to think I don't know if they're thinking consciously, I want to nominate a popcorn movie, but I do think I do wonder rather, not knowing, not having Academy voters to speak to, I do wonder if there's a dichotomy that people draw between like, okay, something sort of serious and something sort of fun. Now, something like Sinners could qualify as both. I mean, Sinners might be that thing that straddles the line, and maybe Sinners will win next month for that reason.
But I know it had a higher budget, but One Battle was also wildly seen as successful.
Yeah, I think One Battle's another one that, I think
it's interesting. Like their point of view, which I don't know if I agree with, was they're thinking as they're filling out their ballot, well, we got to put 1 or 2 popcorn movies into this bucket so we make sure people watch the show. And I'm like, I don't think people are worried about who's watching the show when they're filling out their ballots.
I don't know.
That's my opinion. So the only thing I can even like equate this to is, as a member of the Writers Guild of America, I vote in the WGA awards.
Uh-huh.
And so when I am filling out my ballot, I'm genuinely picking the ones that I believe are my favorite scripts of the year.
Right.
And also, if I have any spares, I'll probably give it to someone I know. I'm not doing it like I'm like, oh, I got to give it to F1 because that was the best popcorn movie of the year. I I think it's a disservice to say that Raiders is a just the popcorn token popcorn movie of 1981 because honestly, first of all, it's the only one that stood the test of time of all those five movies.
Yeah,
I think you guys said that on the Chariots episode or not, but I think it's
I did.
100%
I did.
true.
Yeah.
Uh, Also, by the way, Ed, I didn't know this. I didn't know it was nominated for Best Picture.
Did you
I
not?
had no, I had no clue.
Oh,
This
wow.
is a tremendous surprise for me.
Oh, well, then I redeemed myself again. Another, yeah. So I'm not saying popcorn in a denigrating way. I mean, we've known each other for a long time. For
No,
me,
I know that. I
yeah,
know that. I'm having the I just feel like people aren't voting that way. I mean, Spielberg was a phenomenon in the making in 1981.
yeah,
Him partnering with George Lucas, who was the biggest filmmaker of all time at that point.
yeah.
I can see this just getting the nomination because it was a great movie, not just because they wanted to make sure people watched the award show and they had to give the token popcorn award. You know,
Well, back then, I think watching the show wasn't such a huge mountain to climb because there was
because everyone was watching it.
everybody was
Yeah.
watching it. There were fewer networks. You know, we've heard that, but you know, it's true. There were fewer networks. Everybody was watching the show, and it was movies were back then the center of pop culture in a way that they've taken a back seat. Sadly, they haven't been erased from pop culture, but it's just not the center the way something like, just to be broad, the internet is. You know, just the reach. But yeah, I think that in our 81 episode, of the five Best Picture nominees, I thought this was the strongest one in a walk. I think it was a second for my co-host. I'd have to go back and listen, but you know, I think he had it one or two. And yeah, I mean, as far as a pop cultural imprint, the only thing that people remember about Chariots of Fire, and we cover this ad nauseum, is the running on the beach and the Vangelis cue, and that happens in the first 30. No, sorry, and that happens right at the top of that movie. Like that scene of them running on the beach is the opening credits. I had no idea it was going to happen that soon, having never seen Chariots before we got to that episode. So no, I think it's incredible that this was, I guess this is news to you, Oscar nominated for Best Picture. And because this is only Spielberg's second Best Director nomination. He's snubbed for Jaws. He's nominated for Close Encounters, but the movie is not. And you know, we'll discuss 1941 briefly in a second. So this is a key movie. This is like a real. Well, let's talk about it now. I mean, let's talk about where Spielberg is, because I think the timing of this movie.
He needed a bounce back.
He needed a bounce back, but I think what's really interesting about this movie is the timing, because he made three movies in a row that went over budget: Jaws, Close Encounter, and 1941. Now, two of those movies were hits and turned out well. One of them didn't. And he wasn't in director jail, but he felt a lot of pressure, perhaps self-applied, to bring this movie in on budget.
Yep.
And what you see, and I don't know that how much he'd done it before, you see there's this great video essay, I don't know if you've seen it, called, that Tony Zhao did, called The Spielberg Oneer. And a great example is when we meet Marion, and there's that shot of her doing the drinking contest with the guy. That's all one shot, but it's not all one shot in terms of like going from a helicopter pad down to like a racetrack, you know, like in like moving as far as geography. He's really good at doing a lot of setups in a single setup. And he did that to be efficient. He did that to save money and move along. And he's not yet a producer. I think E.T. is the first movie he produces. I might have that wrong, but I know he's not a producer on this movie, having just watched it yesterday. So, but what's interesting is, as he's making this movie, Heaven's Gate comes out. And Heaven's Gate, which you know I'm sort of an expert on, destroys the auteur dominance over movies. It destroys an auteur having that much control over a movie. And I Raiders would have already been in the can by the time Heaven's Gate came out. So it was already, you know, he already got it in the can on budget. But I think the fact that he was able to make this movie on a pretty tight budget, not low budget, but a tight budget, and it was obviously a huge hit, it really tells Hollywood that, like, okay, this guy's a genius, but he's also a grown up. He also can be trusted because, again, he made 3 movies in a row that went over budget. And there's a lot of directors we can name all day long who always go over budget. And it's a roll of the dice. It doesn't always work out. And there's never been, to my knowledge, a Spielberg movie that had an out of control budget. The budgets obviously go up, but he's never had a movie where it's like, oh my God, he's never had a Titanic.
After that, yeah, after that, starting with Raiders and moving forward, he's been extremely responsible.
Yeah, and I guess he's become a producer and he's producing other people's movies. So I mean, on top of obviously his manifest genius, the fact that he's a grown up and can be trusted, kind of like Clint Eastwood in a different way. That Clint Eastwood famously goes under budget. There's never been a Clint Eastwood movie that's gone over budget, but Spielberg is Spielberg, and obviously he has a great track record. So getting into the movie itself, obviously this opening is so fucking famous, so we could talk about it. But one thing that popped in my head, um, I always forget until I see it that Alfred Molina is I forget his name, but is the guy with Indy who
Yeah,
who tries to screw him over,
who double crosses
who
him.
double
Yeah.
crosses him, and it's such a memorable part. And I wrote this down. I don't know, is Alfred Molina the king of the small part? Because you have this, Boogie Nights, and Promising Young Woman, 3 movies where he's in one scene or sequence that are really, really memorable. I mean, he's a great actor, but I'm just talking about, I don't know, I can think of another actor who's this good at being this good with this little screen time. It just popped in my head when I was watching this because I've obviously seen this movie, I don't know, 100 times, 200. It's incalculable.
I mean, it's so funny to me because I feel like when I finally came of age and understood who Alfred Molina was,
Mhm.
I had not put together that he was this guy in Raiders,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
He's unrecognizable.
Yeah.
And and so when really for me it was Spider-Man 2 and him playing Doc Ock, where I
Right.
was like, this actor is incredible.
Right.
And then yes, going back to Raiders, and it's such a fun little surprise.
Yeah.
No, he's great. I always think of when he does like the gimme gimme money symbol with his hands.
Yeah.
Like, that shouldn't work.
Yeah.
It's so cartoonish, and yet it does, which I think is a testament to him and Spielberg.
Yeah. This is one of the greatest openings of a movie of all time. I mean, it's really I'm gonna one day do a show about like the best movie openings, but I mean, this is just this is just doing so much in such a fun way. We're learning so much, we're learning who this guy is. We're learning, what he does, and it's all action. There's very little dialogue in this. The dialogue is
Yeah.
very perfunctory of just like stay out of the light, and
Well, I mean, they take their time, revealing Indy in the first place. I mean, it's a lot of,
yeah.
pieces of him until he finally steps into the light. It's iconic.
Yeah, it's such a great intro to him, and I guess we should talk about, how can we not? We should talk about Harrison Ford, because he's obviously 2 movies into Star Wars, but I'm sure you know this.
Which is the reason that George Lucas didn't want him.
Exactly, that's
Uh,
exactly, yeah. Why don't you talk about that? That's exactly where I was headed.
and it's just so funny that George was so resistant to the most natural thing,
Yeah,
especially given how some of George's later movies, how the performances are a bit off and wooden in that. It's kind of amazing that Spielberg stepped in and righted the ship there.
yeah. I think Lucas has always been incredible conceptually, and this character is his conception.
Yeah,
And I think the story, which I know Joe knows, but maybe for some of our younger listeners who might not know, Spielberg always wanted to direct a James Bond movie and was
hmm
trying to get a meeting with Cubby Broccoli and and could not get the job, astoundingly. And
well, they were really big on hiring Brits to
yeah,
be.
well,
Yeah,
a Brit or somebody from at least the Commonwealth has directed every Bond movie except for the last one. Kerry Fukunaga is the first American to do it. And I think the only other, I think Martin Campbell might be from New Zealand, but I think other than that, they've all been British.
right.
And it's not even that many directors. It's because the old Bond movies, it's like one guy would do 4, one guy would do 3, and so on and so forth. But what Lucas said to him is, "Oh, I have something that's kind of like James Bond, you know." And this opening is like the cold open of a Bond movie because it doesn't really connect to the rest of the story,
Yeah.
like the idol that he's stealing, and it's sort of, like the Bond pre-title sequences that I love don't connect to the story. Goldfinger being the first one and maybe the most famous one, and it's also, yeah, I mean, it's setting up this idea that like, okay, this guy is an adventurer. It sets up the villain. I mean, it only connects in the sense that we meet Belloc,
Right.
and that's the only thing that kind of connects what we see Indy do to the rest of it. And I think that's great because I think you want to get to Belloc as soon as possible. But and then the
Well,
punch,
that fits the formula that they were going for, which is it's a serial,
yeah,
much like Star Wars. The idea was to make this like the old serials that they watched in movie theaters that were all kind of standalone and maybe had a cliffhanger.
yeah,
But they were short bite stories,
yeah.
and so it not only did it mirror the Bond movies, but it made sense for what they were trying to pay homage to. It was funny. Have you ever seen the transcripts of them talking to Lawrence Kasdan? I don't know if this is on your run sheet or not. Uh,
I have. It's not on my run sheet, but I have seen it. Yes, I have it on my computer. It's
yeah.
yeah. Tell people what
It's
that is, though.
Well, it's incredible. So someone transcribed a brainstorming meeting between George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and Lawrence Kasdan,
Mhm.
the screenwriter of the movie, who weirdly was not nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah, we're gonna get back to that. We're gonna get to Kasdan in a little bit. I
Yeah.
have that in my notes.
But and it's such an interesting glimpse into the process because it's so funny how much when you're talking about a movie and you're conceiving it, really you're just talking to someone or talking it out, whether it's to yourself or to someone else. You're just talking these ideas through until you kind of distill to the good ones. Um, and so it's George and Steven kind of saying, okay, Lawrence, here's everything we got.
Yeah.
And now you go make it work. But it's such a more than I think anything I've seen behind the scenes of this movie. It's such an interesting peek behind the curtain.
Yeah, and we're on it. Let's stay on it. Let's talk about Lawrence Kasdan. So Lucas, as is true of all the Star Wars sequels, at least following the very first one, wrote the story with Philip Kaufman, but the screenplay is credited to Lawrence Kasdan, and Lawrence Kasdan is one of my favorite writers. And this is a really interesting year for him or even stretch of years, because Lawrence Kasdan co-wrote The Empire Strikes Back, and which is widely considered the best Star Wars movie. It's certainly my favorite.
Mine too.
Yeah, not so much of a hot take. I don't think you'd find anybody. For most people, it's either Empire or maybe the first one, and I think that's really the only debate I've heard. I guess
Anything else is them just trying to be edgy.
yeah. And so he is given this job, presumably because he's in sort of the Lucas film pipeline. And I think this is a really great script because I think that of the indie movies, I think this is the strongest script. It's got the best dialogue. It's got kind of the most wit. And I mean, this is an Oscar show. Um, it's nominated. Yeah, it's snubbed for best screenplay. And here's what's nominated in its place. There's 5 movies here. I would easily axe 3 of these, any of 3 of these, to make room for Raiders. So, Absence of Malice, Arthur, Atlantic City, Chariots of Fire, which wins, and Reds. So for me, I would slot out at least. I love Absence of Malice and Arthur. I think those are great scripts. The other 3, throw a dart. I axe any of those for Raiders.
I'm glad you said keep Arthur. I also agree keep Arthur.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's yeah. Wow, that's so wild.
Why do you think that happened?
Especially considering how beloved or how much love they got for all the other categories that it just got skipped over here.
Yeah, I wonder why that is. I mean, do you think? I mean, obviously we can't get in the heads of voters in 1982, but I guess Atlantic City, Chariots, and Reds were heavy hitter, Best Picture. Had a ton of nominations, and Arthur and Absence of Malice both had had actor nominations and sport, both had acting nominations. So maybe that's it. Maybe it's just that those movies all had actor had above the line nominations and Raiders didn't. None of Raiders actors are nominated. So maybe it could be
Yeah,
that.
I mean, it kind of definitely shows you that Raiders was probably in quote unquote last place of the Best Picture nominees. The fact that it was missing that kind of core component when these other movies got it. But it's strange because it is heads and tails screenwriting wise and story, character, dialogue, pacing than all of those movies.
Yeah, I would agree.
So it's kind of wild that it did miss. I'd be so curious to know, probably hard to pull up in an instant, but I wonder if it got a Writers Guild nomination or not. Oh yeah, it did get a Writers Guild nomination.
Okay, so Joe just looked up. Raiders of the Lost Ark did get a Writers Guild nomination, which ties beautifully into what you said a few minutes ago about how, as a Writers Guild member, you just list all the movies that you like. Um, Another thing I want to say about Kaz.
That's how I vote. But I do think the WGA honestly, like, they just pick cooler scripts because I think
Yeah, I
we
agree.
appreciate writing a little bit differently. Maybe the things that we can see in the craft maybe don't spread over to the broader academy. I mean, to me, this year, for the 2026 Oscars, the big writing snub to me was Weapons.
Oh my God, couldn't agree
I,
more.
I mean, first of all, I thought it got snubbed in Best Picture as well. But the fact that it also got snubbed in writing
Yeah,
to me was a travesty, and I was really glad to see it got a WGA nom because it deserves it.
yeah.
So anyway, so I guess look at the Writers Guild writing wrongs, and I mean that as a writing pun spelled wrong.
Well, sticking with that for just
a literary joke for an audio podcast.
yes, yeah, sticking with that. Also, this year, and I said in my 81 podcast that it's a tie, but my favorite movie of 1981 is Body Heat, which Kaz not only writes but directs. And I think if you look at the Body Heat script and the Raiders script, which couldn't be more different from each other, but I mean, it's kind of, an incredible writer, probably at the height of
I
his
wonder,
powers.
I bet that's what it was, man. I bet that's so. Body Heat came out the same year as Raiders,
Yeah,
so that's what it was. I bet the people were probably split on him. You know,
really.
uh, that's probably what happened there.
Oh, that
It's the
could be.
only thing I can think of.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, because Body Heat was a decent sized hit and it comes out the same summer. So obviously, both these movies were in theaters at the same time, which must have been a fun summer for him.
oh my
Um,
god,
an interesting thing about this movie that I guess we'll just do this now. This was the last movie that I watched with my father. And it was
yeah,
interesting because my father had had dementia, short term memory loss. And the last time I saw him, I didn't know it was gonna be the last time. My mother had said, like, why don't you guys watch a movie? And I said, he really can't follow a movie. And so I went on Netflix and the indie movies were playing on Netflix. And I said, like, okay, well, my dad likes this movie. And what was interesting, if I ever get to meet Spielberg, I'd love to tell him this, is that this movie, either for someone, God forbid, who's suffering from dementia, or maybe in a happier version, a really young child, this movie really lives sequence to sequence, meaning you can
mm,
enjoy this movie. We talked about the opening already. That's obviously a self-contained sequence. But I remember when we got to the scene in India, the gunfight where the bar's on fire, my dad said, "This is an exciting movie." And I'll never forget this because I'm like, oh, he's able to enjoy this. He couldn't pass a test on like what happened, but he was still able to enjoy it sequence to sequence. And obviously Raiders
yeah.
isn't the only movie like that, but I do think that the sort of ride stunt show element of this, like there's this horrible phrase that came up when they were making Batman and Robin called toyetic, which is a gross phrase. But I did think about, you talked about the stunt show in Florida, which I also grew up going to because I'm from Miami. I did think about that this show is sort of that this movie is sort of stunt show etic, if that's a word, you know. And I think that's almost intentional. Like I feel like when they did the Indiana Jones stunt show, it's like, yeah, there should be that because that's what the movie is. It should be this thing that can be in a theme park that people can enjoy, not being confined to watching on the big screen. But yeah, I just remember watching that, and we watched, like, I think half of Temple of Doom, and
Yeah.
I mean, a similar thing, but for whatever reason, we didn't finish Temple of Doom. But I just remember I can't not think about my dad when I watch the scene with the bar on fire and the gunfight, and that's such an incredible scene that I don't feel like has enough of a pop, and this movie has so many, like, pop culture things with, like, the boulder and shooting the guy with the sword and, like, the face melting, but I think that scene in, the whole shootout and fire is just fucking masterfully done,
Yes, it
and
is.
and
Yeah.
and again, I don't forget about it, but, indie takes up so much space in pop culture that, like, that there's just no room for that. Like, I get it, but I feel like that's a scene that, like, I always wanna point to and be like, "No, but that scene's, really, really well done and funny." And, like, it's like everything the movie is. It's like it's exciting and there's a ton of humor in it.
I mean, you can take almost any scene out of this movie, and it's like one of the best scenes ever shot and done. I mean, it's Spielberg was cooking at another level. And what's so interesting too about how you can really isolate those scenes is you go back to that. I know I keep bringing up that brainstorm doc
Yeah,
transcript, but like George and Steven were like, "This is what we want." Like what you just described
yeah,
is what they said they wanted this movie to be
yeah,
from the beginning.
yeah,
It's really, and one other thing that came up in that doc when I was looking at it again in preparation for this was you mentioned Spielberg was so conscious about the budget. That is reiterated in that meeting as well.
mhm,
He wanted to keep the budgets down, and he was like, "We're not doing Star Wars opticals." He's like, "So that'll help." Uh,
yeah,
it's and I do think that is one of the reasons why um, each sequence is so strong is because they're really using the entirety of the space around them, the sets, the environment,
yeah,
stunt performers. It's all kind of just there's a tangibleness, a realness to it that I think, especially a lot of recent action movies, when we're shooting with CG and on green screen stages, it doesn't have that tactile feel
yeah,
that the sequences have, and working within those limitations, right? Like, oh, we've got a bar. Let's have fire come down the bar, and Indy gets out of the way of the fire just in time because he gets a bottle and smashes a guy over the skull, right? Like it's that kind of down to earth action is, I think, what makes these sequences pop so much too.
and
It's and you know what, John Wick does that really well as well,
mm.
like a modern equivalent of that. I think that's why those movies have stood out amongst the sea of action movies because they're really working with the environment that is around them.
Yeah, and it's directed by a former stuntman, right?
Uh-huh. Yes, it is.
So, I
Yes,
mean,
it is.
stuntman, you don't have to tell a stuntman to make something tactile because I'm sure every stuntman alive wishes he was a stuntman 40 or 50 years ago. So they could double Indy and Bond and Superman and even just Burt Reynolds and just to do stuff for real. Another kind of pop cultural artifact that's come out of this movie, which I think is really worth looking at or at least glimpsing, is Steven Soderbergh took this movie, took all the sound off it, put it in black and white, and scored it with, I think, The Social Network. And his reasoning was if you strip all the sound away from this movie, you could see how masterfully staged it is. And he quoted,
Mhm.
I'm quoting a quote. He quoted his friend David Fincher, and he said, "There's two ways to stage something, and one of them is wrong." And I think that if you look at any Spielberg movie, he is better than anybody, more or less, at staging, at where the
Mhm.
camera is, how much he's doing. We talked about the Spielberg oneer. There's a scene, and we're jumping around like crazy, but fuck it. There's a scene where, after the basket chase, where the truck blows up and Harrison Ford turns around while the thing is on fire behind him, and then he turns back, and it's like all that's happening in one shot. And again, it's not one shot like traveling a geography. It's just something so efficient. Is that he's letting things play and he's moving the camera, but it's done with
Yeah.
purpose and it doesn't call attention to itself, which I think he's better at than maybe anybody.
What's funny is like that actually is an older technique.
Hmm.
That's something that comes out of the early sound cameras because they were so big and heavy.
Sure.
They were hard to move and they were hard to do coverage with.
Yeah.
So it was easier to have the actors like kind of block within a shot
Right.
different types of movements and such. It's really interesting how he was taking kind of a dated technique and putting a real modern flair on it.
Yeah, I just think it's an interesting thing because it's sort of like Spielberg in that it's efficient and it's sort of invisible, but when you see it, you're like, "Oh, wow, this is really cool." And again, the best example in this movie is our introduction to Marion, where she's having the drinking contest with the guy because he's just showing us so much, and they're not moving, and the camera's moving very subtly. I mean, you can almost
It's perfect. It's a brilliant scene, and we learn so much about her from it and because of it.
yeah.
Uh, but can I, since you brought her up, since you brought Marion up, can I tell you about the one thing about this movie that I think is really strange in retrospect?
Okay.
Like the one thing that does not hold up, and it's something that I don't even know if I was aware of until I had seen that transcript about 10 years ago.
Okay.
But but um, Marion and Indy, obviously they have a romantic connection in this movie, but it is alluded to that they had a prior romantic connection. I think Ed knows where I'm going with
Oh,
this.
I know where you're going. It's okay. Go.
So for whatever reason, like it never occurred to me ever until I read this transcript how young she must have been when they had their romantic connection the first time before the movie. But for whatever reason, this transcript, and maybe it was said in jest and it just doesn't come across because it's writing, but they're talking about her being 12 to 15 years old
No
when
way.
Indiana Jones had a thing with Marion. Um, yeah.
I didn't know she was that young. I don't know. Well, how old is, you know what? We have to look this up now, at least legally. How old was Karen Allen? I want to see how old Karen Allen was.
Oh,
Uh,
that's really interesting versus Harrison Ford in that moment.
no, no,
Well,
no. I just want to see how old. I mean, I know he's 39. How old was Karen Allen? Let's see, Karen Allen. Oh, okay. So Karen Allen was 30. Call it 29. So she could have been 19. So I think maybe either it's an accident or Spielberg was hip to it or he cast a 29-year-old woman. They say 10 years, so maybe she's 19 and he's 29.
yeah.
So,
It's really interesting because this is very much a George Lucas idea. If you look at this transcript, like he's the one really pushing this idea. He's like, it would be really scandalous if, and he's like, but if she's 18 or 19, it's less so. Uh, and so it is interesting that that's where it ended up balancing out. But I don't know if you remember, but in American Graffiti, there's also this one young character who is underage too.
right.
So it's just kind of an interesting idea that George was playing with in the 70s with like I don't know what's going on there, but
I don't know.
especially in light of like recent political events, it's kind of weird, George.
I don't
Not
know.
gonna
I
lie.
see Lucas as kind of asexual and Spielberg too. I'm not saying like as men, but none of their movies, even between them, have any sex. And I think we going back to what I talked about in our trivia, I think the fact that Spielberg pulled back on Indy being James Bond and him being a woman because he's a one woman man in all of these movies. In fact, Marion comes back in 4 and 5. So
Right.
he's not. I mean, obviously he's a good looking guy, and his students have a crush on him. But it's not Bond. It's not sex. It's
Sure. I mean, he even in the one time where Marion really makes a pass at him, he falls asleep.
exactly like he's
But
not interested, and I think he's mirroring Lucas and Spielberg, where he's like he is interested in the making the movie, getting the arc. He's interested in the mission, and like the pretty girl is like secondary. So I
it's interesting too, like thinking back to Jurassic Park. Obviously Laura Dern and Sam Neill are supposed to be together, but they have like almost no actual romantic connection in the movie. I mean, the most romantic thing that probably happens in the movie is when Jeff Goldblum is testing the water on Laura Dern's hand. Uh,
Yeah.
but I mean, I guess yeah, it's interesting. I'm like trying to rack my brain for Spielberg sex scenes, and there really aren't any. I mean,
The only thing that comes to mind is actually in another indie movie, which is in Last Crusade when when he's with the Hotzi, which I love that people call her that. Um,
uh,
and she's kind of nibbling on his ear, and he's like, "I don't like fast women." Like that's the only scene in any Spielberg movie that has any kind of like sexy verve, and it's still pretty chaste in as far as like, but that's
which
as
is
sexy as it gets.
which it is interesting considering that he is supposed to be this sort of James Bond archetype too. That they leaned away from that. I mean, Indy certainly always gets the girl. I mean, he Marion Willie Scott, obviously. So like, there's always some sort of romance happening in the movies, but
Yeah.
that is kind of fascinating. I never really honed in on that, but I mean, I guess just the characters are so rich and good, you don't care.
Yeah, I don't consider it a fault. I mean, I do think that Indy and Marion's love story works. I think Karen Allen's really great in this. I think that I like her character. I love the way she's introduced. I think she has I also love the payoff of the drinking thing, how she's drinking with Belloc and like she's gonna just skate, the fact that we
Oh
know
yeah,
she's not
yeah,
drunk.
for sure.
Yeah, so that's
Again, great writing.
great writing. Yeah.
By the way, did confirm Body Heat was also nominated for a WGA award that year. So
Fantastic.
I really do think maybe that is what happened with the Academy. I think Larry just split the votes. Uh, so,
Interesting.
but yeah, I think the other thing that's interesting too about the writing thing to consider, and I do think this is why sometimes the WGA awards are more interesting of writing craft is the Academy also encompasses non-union scripts as well, right? So
Oh.
anything that's made in the UK that's not WGA covered, that wouldn't be reflected in the WGA awards, but it could be reflected if it was nominated for an Oscar.
So maybe
Um,
Chariots, because I don't know if Chariots was covered. It was a British production because we talked a lot about that in that episode. So Chariots could be one of those things that maybe didn't get a WGA, and because it was
right.
such a heavy hitter at the Oscars, it slipped in.
Exactly. I do that actually honestly feels like that coupled with the fact that he had two kind of regularly movies out in one year,
Yeah,
I think probably is the difference maker there.
yeah, yeah. But that's interesting. Well, thank you for sussing that out, and thank you for shedding some light on the WGA thing because I think that's really interesting.
But
Um,
back to Indiana Jones being a pedophile.
Yeah, I just don't think. I mean, I just think like Spielberg or Lucas, whoever's idea it was, just wasn't thinking
No, it
about.
was Lucas's idea, and
Okay,
he was like, I want to lean into how
so
scandalous this would be.
that's so
So it's
weird.
yeah. I will say though, like that is probably the one like really bad idea that is consistently brought up in this document. Otherwise, a lot of what Lucas says is in the movie.
Right.
Like he really, I mean, really, when you think about the conception of this thing, I know you said it was his idea, and it's very much thought of as a collaboration with the two. But when you look at this document, it is so George Lucas heavy.
Yeah.
Actually, a lot of the things that Spielberg pitches out in this meeting don't make it into the movie. Like
Yeah.
there are a lot of like kind of half-baked fleeting thoughts. It really feels like a dialogue between George and Larry Kasdan more than anything, with the occasional Spielberg check-in.
Yeah. Well, they had worked together on Empire Strikes Back previously, so they probably had a good idea about. I mean, Lucas hires Kazan to do this, so he probably has a good idea about what he can do. And Kazan can speak Lucas's language. Maybe it's just taking some of these crazy. I mean, look, he could have been saddled with this idea of Indy having an affair with a fucking 12-year-old girl, and and maybe Spielberg was smart enough to just be like, well, if I cast a 29-year-old woman, then the math works out in our favor. Like maybe if I cast this 29-year-old woman, then she's 19, and then he's like 30, and then it's not so. It's not great, but it's not so great.
I mean, I guess the good news is by the end of the franchise, they do end up back together. So, I guess it all worked out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously not as big a fan of 4 and 5 as I am through 1 through 3, but I do think the instinct to bring Marion back was a good one. I do like that she's the one for him. And I like Kate Capshaw and Allison Doody, but I don't think in either one of those movies they're even trying to make you think like, oh, he's going to end up with Will. It's like it's Bond. I mean, it's like,
Oh well, I mean, Willie Scott was a prequel. We knew that wasn't going to work out.
well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
This came up. This came up in the '84 episode. So, and we're talking about Indiana Jones. We're a little off topic, but we're still on the topic of Indiana Jones. So, for people who don't know, this movie's set in 1936. Temple of Doom is set in 1935, which by numerically would make it a prequel. Here's my spiel on this, and I don't know if you and I've ever talked about this, but I know you have an opinion. Here's what I heard is the reason why it's set a year before. I heard that Spielberg didn't want it to take place after Raiders because he wanted him to end up with Marion. He didn't want there to be, so that makes sense. But here's what doesn't work chronologically with if you were to go Temple of Doom, then Raiders, and then Last Crusade. There's no one's disputing that. This movie doesn't make sense if Indiana Jones has already had the experience of Temple of Doom. He wouldn't be so skeptical about, I'm just going to call it magic, if he'd had the experience of Mola Ram and all that other shit. I don't think it makes any sense. Do you bump on that?
The thing that always struck me about the prequel argument, because when I was a kid, I don't think it really mattered, right? It was
No.
just another fun Indiana Jones adventure, and I think Short Round especially helps with that. But I think you do watch him, I think, become more of a hero by the end of Temple of Doom, right? There really is that kind of arc from self-serving archaeologist to selfless hero that he goes on, and I think that carries over more into Raiders if you think about it from a character journey standpoint. um and it also kind of jives a little bit with, you know, George Lucas was going through a divorce, Spielberg was going through a divorce. They were just in a darker place, so I think starting the character from a darker place as well, I think it just mirrors who they were at that moment in time. I think Temple of Doom is a fascinating movie. I think it's, look, I don't agree with the hot takes of Temple of Doom is the best one, which is, you know, Quentin Tarantino has famously said.
Yeah.
But I personally do think you can rank the Indiana Jones movies. It's one of the rare franchises where you can rank the movies in the release order. Like, I genuinely like, and I know that this is probably a hot take because a lot of people like Last Crusade, but I think Last Crusade is such a not a because they're different enough, but it was such a back to basics with Raiders that to me they're almost kind of boring to watch back to back, right? Whereas Temple of Doom and Raiders feel like different movies with the same character. Like there's so much variation in Temple of Doom that I can appreciate, but I also understand why people pushed back at the time, right? Like, it was darker and it didn't do the same thing, and it had a really scary scene with a heart. And so I think that you know, there was a weird pushback that forced them to go back to basics, but with time, with some hindsighting, I think it's really easy to see why, you know, when the new Beverly does a double feature of these movies, they do Raiders and Temple, because they really do. They're like chocolate and vanilla.
I agree and disagree with a lot of what you said, but I want to talk about the franchise, and then I want to go back to what you said about the prequel thing, because I think your take on it is fascinating, and you kind of moved the needle in my head a little bit. But going as far as the franchise, I would rank them Raiders, Last Crusade, Temple of Doom, Dial of Destiny, Crystal Skull. But I do think you're onto something, because what I said when we were talking about Temple of Doom last week in our 84 episode is because I also spotlighted the opening sequence of Temple of Doom as one of my favorite sequences of 1984, along with two others from two other movies. The smartest thing I've ever heard said about sequels wasn't said by Steven Spielberg, but it was Spielberg adjacent because it was said by Robert Zemeckis. Robert Zemeckis was asked when are you or why haven't you ever done a sequel to Who Framed Roger Rabbit? And he said, I think the smartest thing, and this applies to Temple of Doom and the argument I think you just made. He said, sequels are a really tough, almost lose-lose situation because if you make something that's too much like the original, people are like, this is just the same thing again. But if you make something that's too different, everybody says, where's the movie I liked? Temple of Doom is where's the movie I liked? It's so different. It's so not running anything from Raiders back. Like Back to the Future 2, actually, even though Back to the Future 2 breaks into the first movie, but sticking with Indy. And that's what I've come to admire about Temple of Doom is that it is so different. There are no Nazis, there's no Marcus Brody, there's no Sala. So I understand why you look at Last Crusade as a return to basics. And Spielberg has said is that he missed Sala, he missed Marcus Brody. He didn't say this, but he missed the Nazis. And I think as a double feature, Raiders and Last Crusade might be kind of dull because they're a lot more alike than Temple of Doom and Raiders. However, I think Last Crusade's fucking amazing. I think I like Raiders more, but I think that Last Crusade, you know, in a very with a very deft hand, the whole opening where we see him as a kid, I think tells you so much about the character and it's not heavy-handed. And I love, Sean Connery was my favorite actor, and I think the inclusion of him as the sidekick is magic. And so that's how I rank them. That's my take on.
No, by the way, that's not me saying it's a bad movie.
No. I know, but
look, I really love Last Crusade too. If it's on, I will get sucked into it.
yeah.
But it's funny, it's not my go-to Indiana Jones movie. Like the first two definitely are.
Yeah. Before we leave the sort of the franchise as a whole, I really want to go back to what you said about Indy starting in Temple of Doom in a darker place, because I remember a few years ago, a friend of mine making a really great observation, sticking with Temple of Doom, the Club Obi-Wan scene, which I love. He is kind of like Belloc there. He is kind of like just this mercenary. And I think what you just said a few minutes ago, that kind of makes the prequel thing kind of makes more sense to me now. I still think he's too skeptical in Raiders, having experienced the magic, but as far as where he goes, as far as becoming a hero at the end of because everything he's doing in the opening of the movie is because he wants his antidote to his poison. It's like cool, but it's not heroic. So you're the first person, and I haven't discussed it with a lot of people, to be fair. You're the first person to sort of like make this prequel thing make sense to me, because I thought it was a fucking mistake. But the first time I like twigged it when I was like, I don't know, like in my teens, I remember thinking like, oh, they fucked up. And I'm like, wait, that's such an easy thing to check. Like, who would fuck that up?
Right.
So I always thought it was a mistake.
I think the other piece to it too, like the character stuff as well. But it's interesting what you said about, I would argue the fact that he did have this supernatural experience in India is the reason he knows to close his eyes when he's tied up at the end of Raiders. So I would actually lean into the thing that you were critiquing of it and say that is the connective tissue between those two things.
Wow. Jesus.
So anyway, I think I just changed Temple of Doom for you.
Well, look, what I've said.
Welcome, Ed. Welcome to the Temple of Doom is good club.
No, I said it was I ranked it very highly in 1984. I said it's the fifth movie of 1984. And my top 5, there's not a single Best Picture winner or nominee in there. My experience with Temple of Doom is this, and I covered this last episode, but since we're on it, let's stay on it. I saw it when I was 6. I thought it was the best movie ever made. I loved it. I was obsessed with it. When I revisited it at like 18, when there was just still 3, I thought it was gross. I thought it was stupid. I thought it was offensive. I've now kind of come back. Come back to like, maybe not where I was when I was 6, but I think everything that you're saying is true. I like how different it is from the original. I like the way it falls between Raiders and Last Crusade. I think the order is kind of perfect. I think this hot take that about being the best one is just sort of crazy. I think
that feels like just Quentin being edgy. But I think that's silly, because Raiders, I mean, look, Spielberg has said on a couple of occasions that look, I don't think people like to rewatch their own movies. I think if you do, you're a bit of a sadist.
Yeah.
He did say that of the ones he can stomach rewatching, Raiders is the one he thinks he got closest to
Yeah.
what he wanted it to be.
Yeah.
And that's a god amongst cinema saying that. And I think that's why you watch it and it is so perfect and it still holds up and it's still so inherently watchable. Yeah, no, the what really irks me more than the people who say Temple of Doom is the best, because I just write that off as silliness, is the people who say Last Crusade is the best because they're just wrong.
Well, I used to be one of those people. I'll say this: Raiders is my favorite, as I said a minute ago. Um, Last Crusade, I used to say was my favorite. It's number two for me. I will say this though: Last Crusade is the one I will go to first. Like, if I'm gonna throw one on, I will throw Last Crusade on before the other four. Um,
Interesting.
but that's also,
But
you know,
yeah, I mean, if you want Sean Connery and Harrison Ford, that makes sense. See, like if I'm gonna watch a non-Bond Sean Connery movie, I'm probably gonna watch The Rock.
so this isn't a rumor, but somebody said, maybe on another podcast they were covering the indie movies. This is a theory that someone had, and I want to know. I might cut this out of this, but I'm just curious what you'd think. So I think the mistake that they made with the Indiana Jones franchise is this idea that it had to be a trilogy, given that serials and James Bond. I mean, there was already 12 James Bond movies. The 12th James Bond movie comes out the same year that Raiders does. So Bond was never a trilogy. It was supposed to go on and on and on. And I think we grew up thinking about the Star Wars trilogy and the Indiana Jones trilogy. And then in 1999, they made a Star Wars prequel. And then there was another trilogy. And then, but it took them so long to get to the fourth Indiana Jones movie, which I think is 70% of what went wrong with that movie, is the fact that they waited almost 20 years and there were a ton of factors. Spielberg didn't want to do it, and then on and on and on. Somebody once said something that I can't unthink about. If River Phoenix had not died and his career went the way we all hoped it would, which is he would have been Leo, he would have been Chalamet, he would have been, this movie star who also was a great actor. I think there was plenty of evidence to suggest that. What if his franchise was Indiana Jones and they followed him age-wise, like followed him through like his young adventures, and you could have had this parallel franchise. Spielberg produces, other cool directors come into it. Somebody once just said, maybe that's what was going to happen. And I can't not think about a parallel Indiana Jones franchise. And then they also could have done Harrison Ford ones instead of him playing Jack Ryan, because Jack Ryan's just not an interesting character. They also just waited too long to do. So you could have had two franchises, a young, like an Indiana Jones in his 20s and 30s, and you could have moved that story along, and you would have had much sooner Indiana Jones 4, 5, 6. I mean, I don't know.
I think the franchise would be in a much better position if that had come to pass.
Yeah.
I look. I mean, I don't know if when they did Raiders, if they set out to be like, oh, we're going to do a trilogy. I think that feels like something that maybe crystallized as they were probably doing the third one.
Sure.
Because that ending is so definitive with them riding off into the sunset.
Sure.
But I think they were trying to do a fourth one throughout the whole 90s. I mean,
yeah.
Poor Frank Darabont wrote a gabillion drafts of different versions of fourth movies.
Yeah.
To the point where one of my favorite quotes of all our guests that we ever did on the Postmortem podcast was Frank Darabont saying, one of the reasons he stepped away from making movies was he didn't want to get to, he said, nobody gets to their deathbed and says, gosh, I wish I had more deadlines.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like, his chase to get a fourth Indiana Jones movie is probably something that helped, him get to that point emotionally. But yeah, I think I I think to me those first three movies are the ones that
Yeah.
the fourth one. I think the only reason why I give it a little bit more credit than the fifth is just because it does feel like Lucas and Spielberg coming together again.
Mm,
Even if it is a little goofy and they made some decisions I wouldn't have loved to have seen, but
right.
the fifth one just feels like a Disney product that they're doing because they have to keep the franchise going and they want to make money. It's a little too cynical to me.
Mm.
But yeah, but those first three movies, boy, did they just get the magic right, you know?
Yeah,
Uh,
and maybe yeah. I one last sort of like I guess rumor thing, and this is like a straight up fan rumor. So the summer before Crystal Skull came out, I went as I've been many times to see John Williams at the Hollywood Bowl, and I've seen him 6, 8 times, whatever it was, and he always plays the Raiders March along with Star Wars stuff. It's stuff he does every and you know a friend of mine said that he had heard a rumor, and this is pure internet speculation bullshit, but it did pop in my head a year later when I was watching Crystal Skull. There was a rumor, and maybe this was in one of the Darabont scripts, I don't know, that the plot, and this ties back to Raiders, which I do want to get back into, that the plot of 4 was going to be something like the Russians get the Ark and have weaponized it, and then Indy's the only person who's seen it that's like still alive. And he sort of so it's almost sort of like this soft remake of the first one. And I remember walking out of the Hollywood Bowl and thinking like, that's actually a pretty good idea. And then as I saw the trailers for Crystal Skull, I'm like, okay, well clearly they're not doing that. But I do wonder because they sort of have one foot in it when they bring Marion back in
yeah.
Crystal Skull. Like if they taken them back to this story in this movie, maybe it would have been better. I don't know.
See, my I actually prefer them as standalones. I mean,
Yeah.
look, we could do a whole separate podcast on our opinions on James Bond because you
Mhm.
and I are both obsessed with that franchise. But one of my issues with the Daniel Craig movies versus all of the other 20 movies is I can pick up any of the other movies
Yeah.
and watch it as a standalone thing. The
Yeah.
Craig movies are so interconnected,
Yeah.
and I would hate to have an Indiana Jones movie be that tied to the first movie where it becomes homework. I mean, one of the best parts about the first, honestly, all five of the movies is you kind of don't need to have seen the other ones to just walk in and enjoy the adventure.
Yeah.
And I do think that is one of the strongest pieces of Indiana Jones as a tentpole. One of the most unique things about it, because I can't think of another standalone franchise. I mean, Bond did it for a long time, but it stopped. That isn't interconnected like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. That's a good counter. So getting back into Raiders, um, oh my God, there's so much to talk about, but I think we're talking a lot about how great the action is and how this movie is can sort of function as a set piece, sort of a clothesline of set pieces, and it certainly can. I do think another scene I won't say I forget about, but that I always appreciate every time I watch it is after Indian believes that Marion is dead. He has that kind of quick sit down with Belloc. And I think that's a really, really well written scene. And that feels like nothing else in the other 4 movies where it's just 2 characters talking. And I think let's talk about Belloc in general, because I think that he's a really interesting villain. I think in the beginning, he's just sort of this villain in white, and he definitely is. But I like, and I think a lot of it has to go to Paul Freeman, who played the part, a lot of credit for this. I like how there are shades of humanity in Belloc. Like Belloc sucks, he's the bad guy, but
Sure.
I don't think he's a Nazi. I think he's hooking up with the Nazis because it serves his interest, which a lot of
Yeah.
people did.
Uh-huh.
And I think that when, like when Indy and Marion, or at least Marion is shut into the, to die with the snakes, I think he does feel bad. I mean, he swallows it and he'll move on. But I love the idea that like when he's saying like, you're just a shadowy version of me. And that plays into your thing about Temple of Doom being the prequel of like, yeah, maybe Indy was like Belloc. Maybe he was no better, and and this is the movie where because Indy's very selfish. He's like, I'm not scared. I want to get the Ark because it's big for the museum. So I think this is the movie where he becomes a believer because you don't in 3, 4, and 5, you don't see any more skepticism from him. Like whatever the
Mhm.
magic is, he's like, yes, this is serious. I believe. Like there's none of the skepticism that we see in the first, I guess, two. So
Drinks from the right cup. Uh,
exactly, yeah.
yeah,
So I just think Belloc, without making too big a meal of it, is he's not really in like the canon of great villains. He's not Hans Gruber, or he's not the Joker, or he's not Terrence Stamp. Like in Superman 2. But I do think that like he's written and played with a little bit of nuance that I appreciated in a movie that's a movie that's this sort of unserious and fun.
I think no, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said he is reflective of those people who worked with the Nazis for their own gain.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that is an interesting character to interject into what otherwise could have been potentially a cartoonish portrayal of the Nazis,
yeah,
especially with how over the top the gentleman who was almost played by Roman Polanski
yeah,
is. I do think he helps kind of ground that. And it's also interesting having on the Nazi side, like you said, this um, essentially mirrored version of Indiana
yeah,
Jones, because that's what makes that moment so great when Indy is threatening to blow up the Ark with the rocket launcher, and he's like, "Do it," because
yeah.
he knows that Indiana can't do it because he couldn't do it either.
Right.
Um, that's such a cool, interesting dynamic.
Yeah, he calls his bluff, and then he pulls a gun on the Nazis. He's like, he racks the gun, and he's like,
Yeah,
but you're
because
right.
he's so sure
Yeah,
that it's a bluff.
he
Yep.
knows it's a bluff because it pays off that cafe scene early in the movie. He's just like, you want to see this thing opened just like I do, and that comes up again in some of the that comes up with the with the Ilsa character who turns out to be a Nazi, and she's she's obviously much younger, but you definitely see with her that she's sort of like she's in that that school of like she is like kind of like Belloc. She's like, I want this thing. I'm going to align myself with the Nazis. And then you see in Last Crusade where they're burning the books, so she's upset by it. She's not a Nazi, but she's aligning themselves with. So I think that's in these first, well, yeah, in these first three movies, maybe even just 1 and 3, because we're dealing with the Nazis specifically in those. It's just very interesting how they sort of like depict that. So let me ask you this, and I think you're a good person to ask about this. So I've had this conversation with a lot of friends of mine, and I'm sure you've been in these conversations too, where a lot of people will ding big action movies. I'm not a gamer, I don't know if you are, but a lot of people will ding action movies as being too much like a video game. Now, I don't mean CG and non-tactile stunts, but just the idea of like having to clear levels. Like that's something that's been lobbied against the later Mission Impossible movies. That's something that's lobbied against Inception, where they're literally going through levels.
Uh,
And I understand the argument. That's never bothered me. I'm also not a gamer, but I did think about it in this because once he gets to the desert, it's like the snakes is a level, and then the dude with the airplane is a level, and then stealing the truck is a level. I don't think that's a bad thing if it's done well. Do you have any skin in this game?
I would say this: good action movies infuse character into those sequences, so they don't just feel like you're moving through a level of a video game, right?
Right.
So, for example, the plane sequence, which you brought up, which is also wonderfully recreated in the Disney Sun Show.
Yeah.
But Indiana Jones has to fight someone who is much, much, much bigger than him.
Yeah.
And he has to find a way to defeat him, and he does it by using the environment around him, right?
Right.
Obviously, the propellers do that guy in.
Yeah.
Um, and I think another great example of that too is um, you could have a fight scene through the streets, but what they do is they take Marion and they put her in one of those baskets, and he's got to try to figure out which one she's in.
Right.
Like that adds a whole new level to that action that could have just been pretty just run through the streets trying to chase after someone. Another great example of and granted he was sick, and this is why they had to do it.
Mhm.
But there's that wonderful moment where there's a sword fighter, and he draws his sword, and he's flipping it around, and he just pulls out his gun and shoots him.
Yeah.
Right. What's ironic is like Harrison Ford was apparently on death's door that day, and there was a whole fight scene planned for that, but
Yeah.
it is so Indiana Jones to be like nonplussed by this showmanship and so practical of I need to get back to Marion, boom, moving on.
Yeah.
Right. And it's moments like that that make Indiana Jones better than your average action movie, right?
Yeah.
Die Hard, one of the most brilliant things they do in that movie is he doesn't have shoes,
Yeah.
right? He's walking around barefoot, so when he steps on glass, you feel it more. When you find those little bits of humanity and you infuse them into an action sequence, suddenly it becomes so much more than just punching through non-playable characters.
Yeah. Well said, and I agree. I just want to kind of get because we're kind of this movie does have that, and that's sort of my argument that like, well, look, Raiders of the Lost Ark is levels, but it's done well. I want to stick with you. Just mentioned something that's maybe the most famous thing in this movie, where he kills the swordsman, and I'll be the 1 billionth asshole to make this connection. It's. I think this is a little bit of Spielberg's humor because infamously George Lucas changed Han shooting first, and that's the scene that made Harrison Ford a movie star. And I had said back then when that happened, I'm like, well, wait, is he going to go back to Raiders of the Lost Ark and have like like that guy get closer to Harrison? So it's the same joke. It's just like this guy's such a. I mean, it's played more comically in Raiders than it is in Star Wars, but it's the same thing. It's just like this guy is just is a badass, is a hero. He doesn't have so I just always thought that was funny that like he went to all this trouble to make Han not shoot to make Han not shoot first, and then in another
Sure.
movie that has his name on it, there was no discussion as far as I'm concerned, as far as I'm aware of, like, oh, we can't have that anymore. And it's a more cold-blooded murder in Raiders. Like in Star Wars, not to turn into Kevin Smith here, I argue it's self-defense because Greedo's saying, like, I'm going to take you out back and fucking kill you. So he's just getting the jump on him. In Raiders, he could just run away from that dude. And I think what also in Raiders, the sword is comically big. Like they make that sword at least 2 sizes bigger than it probably would be. And I think that's telling you as an audience member, like this isn't serious. Like this guy's life is not worth, like, so I think that's something that Spielberg does to maybe to head off that Lucas thing.
But the movie walks like it borderlines being cartoonish at times, right?
Yeah.
Like literally when Marion hits Indy with the mirror late in the movie, he does like a goofy like yahoo-y, like like it really just it walks the line up to cartoon and it stops right before, which I think is just an amazing testament to Spielberg's handle of tone. It's also, I think, one of the reasons why, to me, it was so shocking to discover it was nominated for Best Picture.
What's interesting about this movie is I think Raiders is the best of the 5 movies as far as what a friend of mine called the magic, like handling the magic. Like this movie's very, very rooted, as fantastic as it is. It's very, very rooted in our world. Unlike Star Wars, this is set on planet Earth. It's set in the past. It's not it's a world we can understand. Until it comes to the opening of the Ark. And I think that I recently, maybe in the last year, rewatched Close Encounters of the Third Kind because I got the 4K. And it's interesting because the setup of the climax of this is very similar to the Close Encounters. I don't know if you ever twigged this, because it's like this group gathering to try and like summon something, and they don't know what it's gonna be, except that these are obviously Nazis. And again, in both movies, the hero is like watching, and Richard Dreyfuss is watching it from a remove. He kind of like walks up to it. But I love. I used to be very afraid of when the ghost's face turns into a skeleton, because like the music
Sure.
changes there. But I love how quickly this is done, like just in time. I feel like it's not, because the one thing I ding, as much as I love Last Crusade, I do feel like that goes on for a very long time, like this same part of the movie where he's like going through the maze and everything, and we do get that sort of famous line, he chose poorly, which I think is like the thing from Last Crusade that's like, that's like the pop culture takeaway. But I think that Raiders is the best of all five of them, really, of doing, of like the magic of like when the movie becomes supernatural. Maybe supernatural is not the right word. I'm just using just not real. I think this is the best, most efficient depiction of that.
Yeah. I always think when I think of a scene like that, I think of something that Harold Ramis said on the Ghostbusters commentary. I know that maybe feels like a weird thing to bring up, but Harold Ramis and Dan Aykroyd are great writers too. They talked about you don't start with the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man; you have to build toward it.
Mm.
And so you have the library ghost, you have Slimer, you have the terror dogs, you have the containment breaking, you have right like it's a gradual build to there's Gozer, and then there's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
Mhm.
I think the brilliant thing about um, what Raiders does is even though the supernatural stuff the is contained solely to the end, there is so much hype around the mysticism of this thing throughout.
Mm.
And as you start to see some of the lore come true, right? Like when he there's that great moment where he takes the staff and he
Yeah.
takes one foot of it back for God and figures out the correct spot, and the light pierces through it and hits the
Yeah.
it's like you see little things like that
Great
so
moment.
that
Yeah.
you're ready to be open to the supernatural at the big supernatural thing at the end. It's really really well modulated in that regard, and again, I think maybe that's why I feel like Last Crusade is the same flavor of that, because it is kind of all the supernatural stuff is back ended, whereas it comes a lot sooner in Temple of Doom.
Yeah.
So it's but it's a really good effective formula for getting people ready to accept whatever the big ask is going to be.
Right.
Um, and so just again, great screenwriting, which is so shocking that Larry was not nominated. So
Yeah. Another stray moment that I love, um, because it's just so, I always pump my fist in the air. It's when after Indy escapes, it's in between the airplane fight and the truck chase. Like this tower blows up, and Bella goes, "Jones." And I just thought that was a very Bond moment. There's like so many Bond movies where it's like something will explode, it'll seem to escape, and they'll just be like Bond. And I'm not even saying it's a conscious like homage to that, but it's just like such a
no,
great.
I feel like it absolutely is. I
Yeah.
mean, this it's so again, this movie wears its influences on its sleeve. It's really interesting how Star Wars and Indiana Jones, almost like Tarantino would do 15, 20 years later,
Mhm.
kind of just remixes things they love
Yeah.
and makes them feel new again.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't be surprised if that was intentional. I mean, I know I love putting in things that are little twists and homages to I someone clocked in The Inheritance, there's a line where they call a part of the wing of the mansion Spook Central, and that's very much a line from Ghostbusters.
Right.
I think you find ways to pay tribute to what you love, and I'm sure they wanted to make a Bond movie, and that feels like you said a Bond moment.
Yeah, and it's interesting, two things there, like the you see the influence of Indiana Jones back on Bond, because the next Bond movie after this is he's in India, and it has Octopussy has a very Indiana Jones feel. It's still very Bond, but you do see them sort of chasing what was chasing them. We have not talked about what I think, and maybe you would agree, is the best action sequence in this movie, which is the truck chase. Um,
Unbelievable.
yeah,
Yeah.
Roger Ebert, in his review of To Live and Die in L.A., talked about the 4 great car chases in movie history, and this was on the list.
Yeah.
And it's not even really technically, I guess, a car chase. I guess he's chasing the car from the horse, but um, this is just such great stunt work. And I don't know if you knew this, the second unit shot this. Spielberg did storyboard this. So he definitely, orchestrated this, but apparently the second unit did a lot of this. And the reason for that is because one of the reasons 1941 went so over budget is that he was so obsessive about doing like model work and stuff. He was doing second unit work, on first unit dollars. And that's one of the many reasons why the movie went over budget. And he said he came to Raiders very humble, and he was willing to sort of like not give up control, but certainly willing to like use his whole crew in a different way. So it's still Spielberg directing this, but I think it's interesting that the second unit did a large part of this, which I think is kind of amazing. It speaks well of everyone.
That's super fascinating. I actually did not know that. That's really quite cool. It's interesting. I mean, when you have big stunts like that, I remember um the first time I was around stunts of this kind of scale. I was an intern on a Peter Berg movie called The Kingdom,
Mhm.
which very famously had a big car crash sequence on a freeway in it. It was kind of the centerpiece of the movie, and I got to watch that be shot. I got to literally run Gatorades to the stuntmen as fires were like going on either side of me.
Right.
It was pretty cool. But what was interesting was it really was a second unit run. It was shot on the weekends. Peter Berg was kind of just like chilling and hanging out. Like it was not film school. Me was so surprised to see so much of that handed off to department heads. And just Pete was just kind of like chilling,
Mm.
like because when you're in film school, obviously like you're doing multiple jobs. You're literally like you're running on such a shoestring budget that
Right.
the directing and producing and camera work and things can all really blend together. But yeah, it's. I mean, look, when you hire department heads, you want to hire people who can do the job better than you ever could, and you want to be able to trust them with that. And so, I mean, and boy, did he hire the best people, and they delivered one of the greatest sequences of all time.
Yeah,
So
and they were following his storyboard. So I mean, I'm not trying to paint it. I know you understand this. This is obviously still Spielberg orchestrating this and telling them, how he wants everything to come together. But yeah, this sequence is just so masterful and so fun. And again, you see the influences because when he's going underneath it and being dragged behind that stagecoach, the old John Ford movie, which was old even then. It was already a 40-plus-year-old movie.
right.
Yeah, so that's that sequence might, as far as like the action sequences of this franchise, that might be my favorite. Another action sequence that I love is the sort of tank chase in The Last Crusade. I think that's an underrated. Um, if people haven't seen the movie, it's worth. Obviously, the movie's worth it, but I thought that I remember when that movie was coming out, Premiere Magazine did like a TV special, like 4 big summer movies in 1989, and they just showed Spielberg shooting that tank chase in the third movie. That's a
Yeah.
dark horse for my favorite action sequence of the whole franchise.
Oh,
But
for sure. It's. I mean, there's a simplicity and wonderfulness to the chase in Raiders, but the scale of the tank chase is so much bigger
yeah,
than Last Crusade. It's you know almost can't compare them because
right.
Spielberg's in just a different place in his career by that point. But
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really wonderful and well done.
Yeah.
Um,
The one of the last things I want to talk about, which is fittingly at the end. So when I was a kid, I didn't understand or even follow how great this ending is. Like this last
mhm.
scene, like the joke and the irony of this. It's not that I didn't understand it; I just wasn't paying attention. Like I wasn't because I was I didn't see this in the theater, but I probably saw it on video. I might have even seen it after Temple of Doom. I can't remember. I know I saw Temple of Doom in the theater, so maybe I saw this after. So maybe I was like 7 or 8. I couldn't tell you, but I never, I just didn't understand, as I'm sure my 7-year-old son wouldn't, why it's so funny that this thing just ends up in a fucking crate, you know, in a warehouse just to be disappeared. Almost like the end of Citizen Kane in reverse. So I think that's another great, great cheeky joke in this movie filled with them that like we're seeing everything we've seen this guy go through. And he thinks like, oh, he's worried about like, oh, they're going to use this thing. How are they going to use this thing? Are they going to make it a weapon or something? And like we're seeing something that Indy doesn't know, which for maybe the first and only time in the whole franchise.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's like such a bureaucratic ending. Like to me, as an adult, and now understanding the world and politics and governments and bureaucracy, and it's so it is so perfect.
Yeah.
As a child, it is a little anticlimactic.
Yeah.
So and maybe that is why Temple of Doom and Last Crusade we have more nostalgic for because there's a little bit more of a button on each of those movies.
Yeah.
But this is the better version, and also interesting too because uh, something that I think continues to plague Indy throughout these movies, and it's something that the fifth movie did get right is Indy always seems to have to let it go, right?
Mm,
He has to let it go in Raiders. He has to leave the stones behind in Temple of Doom. He has to, literally the words "let it go" are uttered by Sean Connery in
Last
Last
Crusade.
Crusade.
Yeah.
And then in the in the fifth, well, I guess the fourth movie, the aliens take off, so he lets it go there. And then the fifth movie, there's been so many arguments about why doesn't he stay in the past? It's because he learned to let it go,
Mm,
right? It actually is an interesting culmination of those uh, all those other endings kind of coming to roost in the fifth one,
mm,
which I don't even know if I've ever even like put together before this moment.
yeah.
But it actually in weirdly, because I think I'm sure you've heard that argument of like he always wanted to be in the past. Why doesn't he stay in the past? And
Right.
I think that is the reason. I don't know if it was articulated well enough in the movie,
Right.
but I think that is kind of from a franchise perspective why he doesn't stay and why he goes back to be with Marion.
Right.
Um, he learns to let it go.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. So Joe, where can people find you if they want to find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Joe Russo Tweets. They can find me on Instagram at Joe Russo Graham. And they can find me on the TikTok at Joe Russo Talks, TOKS.
All right. You can find me on Instagram and Letterboxd, Edward Clow for both of them. You can find some short films I've done on Vimeo. If you have any questions or comments you want to send in, send it to hindsightingquestions@gmail.com. If I get a bunch of those, maybe I'll do like a mailbag episode. Going back to Letterboxd for a second, I've got a list of the 1981ers, just not ranked, but you could just sort of see the other movies, some of which we're going to cover, some of which we're not, just other movies from this year that I like. Joe, thank you so much. That was such a great chat. I'm glad I got you for this one.
Thanks, Dad. It was really fun. It was great to do a revisit my second favorite movie of all time and to have a deep dive conversation.
Yeah. Next episode, Billy Corbin and I dive into another 1981er with Absence of Malice. Till then, looking forward to looking back.